Hi everyone, welcome back to Agape Gardens. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thanks for checking us out. Today we are actually working on canning some vegetable broth. So my husband and I have been working on adjusting our diets to be almost entirely plant-based, and one of the things that we use a lot is vegetable broth or stock. A lot of times for convenience we'll use a bouillon, a vegetable bouillon. However, they often have a lot of salt and we want to cut back some of that salt. So I wanted to make a home canned version that will be just as convenient and will be much lower in salt. So let's get started. The first thing you'll need are your vegetables. So I just pulled out what I have in the fridge. I have some carrots that I bought at the store. I have some celery. I have some leeks that I bought for a recipe that I need to use up. I also have all of my frozen onion peels, shavings from carrots, some celery, all of that. I just keep this bag in the freezer and I just throw in any peels as I am cooking. That way I can use all of this to make broth. I also have some garlic I'm going to use. I had some really tiny heads that are the last of what we grew, along with some store-bought garlic, some fresh onions, some frozen bell peppers that I'm going to add in. I'm loosely basing this off of the vegetable stock recipe in the Ball canning book. I'm going to take a few liberties, however. This recipe calls for turnips and calls for tomatoes. I don't have any tomatoes because I don't buy tomatoes at the grocery store, but I do have some tomato paste that I'm going to add in, and I'm going to add the leeks like I said. So we're going to, first step, which the canning book does not call for, I'm going to roast some of these vegetables. I'm going to roast them just to enhance their flavor, get a deeper flavor from them. We're not going to roast all of them, but just about half. So we're going to chop these up, get them onto our tray to go into the oven. So let's get started. All right, so now that we have these vegetables chopped up, we're going to go ahead and put them into a 450-degree oven for about 20 minutes. We'll just keep an eye on it. We're looking for that Maillard reaction that kind of caramelizes the sugars and gives us a deeper flavor. So we're going to put those in and work on the rest of our veg. Now, when you're working with leeks, as they grow, dirt gets in between the layers. Each of the layers is a leaf essentially. So we're going to cut this top part off. I'm going to cut these down and then we're going to wash them so that we make sure we get all that dirt out. Okay, so we have our leeks washed. If you don't have one of these salad spinners and you are planning to eat a lot of produce out of your garden, or you eat a lot of produce in general, I highly recommend investing in a salad spinner. Usually people think of them just for salads, and so you can sometimes find them at discount stores like Savers or Goodwill or something like that, relatively inexpensive, and even on Facebook Marketplace. And they're really awesome if you think about washing strawberries, any kind of fruit or something that you want to get dry before you put it away. Absolutely irreplaceable. So I highly recommend that. So we've got our leeks washed. I didn't bother drying them because we're making vegetable stock, so they're going to be submerged in water. Anyway, I have this gorgeous stock pot I got for Christmas this year from my beautiful sister-in-law, and so we're just going to go ahead and put the rest of the vegetables right in here and get them ready to go. So if you chop your vegetables into smaller pieces, it's easier for it to get into the liquid, the nutrients, the minerals, and the flavor. Right, we're gonna put our whole bag of frozen pieces in there. You can see there's just the whole part that was peeled out of the end. Obviously, it's sometimes they start to get wrinkled, or I know I'm not going to use it. Throw the whole half of it in there. Obviously, you don't want to use any kind of produce that's going bad. You want it to be in good condition. I also have, the ball recipe calls for some bell peppers, which I wouldn't ordinarily think of, so I'm not going to put just a whole lot in there, but I am going to put some in to give it a try. And these are frozen bell peppers from our garden. Right, so we're going to add some herbs. Also, we're going to add some parsley. There's some rosemary. We're in the middle of a winter storm, so I'm not going to go outside and pull off the plant, so I'm going to throw some rosemary in there. Dried rosemary. Some thyme. Grown here. The ball recipe calls for some black peppercorns, I think about 8. I'm making a bit more here, so I'm just going to put a small handful in. And then bay leaves. I ordered a pound of bay leaves from Azure Standard about a year ago. That's a lot of bay leaves. So we can just add a little bit in here. So now all we have to do is wait for our roasted vegetables, fill our stock pot with water, and get it on the stove. Alright, so we've got all of our vegetables in our stock pot with our herbs, and our veggies have come out of the oven. So you can see that they've just kind of caramelized a little bit. I don't know if you can see on this one. Caramelized a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and throw those in, and then I'm going to deglaze. So all that means is while this pan is really hot, I'm going to put some water on it, scrape it with this spatula. Okay, so you can see there's some this brown liquid. That's actually all of the flavor from roasting those vegetables. So we want to add that in. Okay, and now we fill with water. And then we don't want to forget our tomato paste. I may actually add more tomato paste after I taste this, after it's been boiling for a while. I'm not super concerned about the ratios of ingredients that I'm including here because I'm going to pressure can this. If you're unfamiliar with canning, you want to make sure you refer to your canning book or any guidelines provided by the manufacturer of your canner. All right, so now we're going to turn on our heat, let this all warm up, come to a boil, and simmer for a few hours, and we will be back when we are ready to strain and can. Okay, so the next process of our broth, we've boiled it with the lid on for about 2 hours and boiled it without the lid on for a couple of hours, and you can see that the water level has reduced. And so the next part in the process is to just strain out those vegetable bits. I like to put it in this strainer and let it sit over so I get all of that liquid out, or as much as possible. All right, so we are back. We've got our vegetable stock. We're just warming it a little bit. You can see there's still some herbs and things in there, but we're going to strain that out as we can. We've got our pressure canner filled to the appropriate level with some white vinegar. That just keeps the minerals from sticking to the jars as they're coming out. And so the process I like to do is I use my canning funnel a small strainer or sieve, and I put a little bit of cheesecloth over it just to catch any of those fine bits, because I like my broth or my vegetable stock to be pretty clear. So I'll just put this on my canning jar. These are room temperature canning jars. If you're putting hot liquid into a cold jar, you can crack your jar. Same with the canner. So I have the canner on very low. The water in it is cool because I don't want to crack my jars. So I use a 2-cup measuring cup to pour my broth in because it's a lot more efficient than trying to use a ladle. So that's what we're going to do. We'll just get some of our broth, pour it in. All right, that's just about perfect. We want about 1 inch from the top. Now, if you're new to canning, you want to make sure that you check your manufacturer guidelines. You want to make sure that you know how to can the food that you're trying to preserve. That way, you don't end up with any kind of illness or contamination or spoiling that happens. So we just want to wipe the rim. You always want to go through and just feel the edge of your jar. Make sure there's no problems, because that will inhibit the seal. So we go ahead and just fingertip tight. That's fingertip tight. So then we'll just go ahead and put this into our canner and move on to our next jar. Okay, so we have our 9 pints in the canner. We're going to go ahead and turn the heat up to about medium. We want to start really warming this up, but we don't want to warm it up so quickly that our jars crack. I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. This is a Presto canner. What we're waiting for is for the pressure to build inside the canner. This will come up and let us know that the pressure is built. Once we get a steady stream of steam coming out here, we're going to time that for 10 minutes, and then we'll put the weight on our pressure canner. This gauge is here. It gives you an idea of when it's at about 10 pounds of pressure, which is the appropriate pressure for my area. This is what makes it safe, because should it exceed pressure, this is where the pressure would release instead of the whole thing, for lack of a better word, blowing up in the kitchen, which is why you want to make sure you always have one of these. So we're going to let that pressure build, and we'll be back when we put our weight on. Okay, so this is a steady, I hope you can see that on there, a steady stream of steam. Our plug has come up, so now we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. Okay, so I wanted to, while we wait our 10 minutes before we put our weight on, I wanted to just talk about a few things with canning. So typically, if you are canning a high acid food, you could water bath can that, meaning you don't have to have a pressure canner. You can essentially just use a large pot or a water bath canner with a towel or something on the bottom to keep the jars from being directly exposed to the heat and cracking, and cover that, and you can process certain things like tomatoes, some salsas, things like that can be water bath canned. You need to pressure can anything that is a low acid food, so green beans, vegetable stock, anything like that. So you always want to refer to your manufacturer's recommendations when canning. You want to do that because you could inadvertently preserve food that could be harmful to your family. So you always want to make sure you use an approved canning recipe. So I'm using the vegetable stock recipe from the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, and I'm going to process my pint jars for 30 minutes under 10 pounds of pressure. So the level of pressure that you want to pressure can with depends on your sea level. For where I live, I process at 10 pounds of pressure. I also wanted to to say that there are a number of different kinds of weights. You want to use the weight that comes with your pressure canner. Some of them have this dial that processes in a different way. I use this weight on my Presto canner that jiggles, and you want to know what that sounds like, because pressure canning isn't something where you want to go ahead and set it and leave the house or do anything like that, go be in the garden while you're pressure canning. You want to make sure that your weight is rocking at the appropriate speed, so it's good to be within earshot and paying attention to that. I also wanted to talk about a few different options for jars. So I used pint jars here, pint jars with a standard ring. There are some advantages and disadvantages to using the different kinds of jars. So here's a pint jar that is a wide mouth jar. So they take a different size of lid. Typically the wide mouth lids, if you buy the ball lids, are a little bit more expensive, but not very much. The way that I determine how I want to preserve my food is based on how I'm going to use it. So if I were canning something like green beans, this would be a whole lot easier, a wide mouth jar, a whole lot easier to get things in and out of. Same thing if I were doing beets or something like that, where food wouldn't get caught. If I'm doing something liquid, a standard mouth jar would be more beneficial because there's not anything that's going to get caught or make it difficult to fill the jar. There is another size that you can can in, and that is a quart jar. You may be wondering why I didn't can my vegetable stock in quart jars, because typically when you think about stock, you think about soup. And although I will use some of this vegetable stock for soup, I use it a lot in regular cooking, in making sauces, in cooking rice and things like that. So that's why I chose to do the pint-sized jars, because I'm not going to use a whole quart at a time. You want to can in the size that you will use. So if your family doesn't eat a whole quart of spaghetti sauce, maybe you want to just can a pint of spaghetti sauce, or if you're an individual or you want to preserve it as a convenience food for, say, a lunch or something like that. So keep that in mind as you are canning. Okay, so our timer has gone off, and now I'm going to place our weight on our vent. So once that starts rocking, I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes, but not before it starts rocking. Okay, so our timer has gone off. We're going to turn off the stove. We're going to allow the canner to release that pressure naturally. Alright, so our pressure indicator has gone down. I'm just going to remove the weight and set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes before we try and take our lid off. I'm going to go ahead and remove the lid and let that vent again for another 10 minutes before we remove our jars. Anytime you remove the lid, you want to make sure that you remove it and open it away from you so that steam doesn't come at your face. So you can see I just kind of have it venting a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and set my timer, give that a good 10 or 15 minutes before we try and take our jars out. Okay, we've let our canner cool. We took the lid off, let it sit another 10 minutes, and now we're ready to take our jars out. And you want to always set them on a towel or something that isn't going to be putting them directly on the cool counter. Again, we want to avoid the jars cracking. You want to make sure you leave them in the location wherever you take them out. Leave them for 24 hours, and then you can remove the rings, mark them, and put them away. There we are, 9 jars of delicious vegetable stock. I want to thank you all for hanging out with me today while I get this vegetable stock canned. I'm going to go ahead and fill my canner with cool water and start the second batch. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up. It really does help the channel. And hit that notification bell for an alert anytime there's a new video. Thank you all. You have a good day.